Why did that old parasite show up? There's no room for you. That was the first thing my daughter-in-law said when she opened the door to the house I built. I hadn't been to the beach house in over a year, but every turn of the road still felt familiar. The eucalyptus trees lining the drive, the chipped blue mailbox that needed replacing, even the soft crunch of gravel under my tires. It all felt like returning to something I had built with my own hands. And I had. I parked under the carport expecting silence and sea breeze. Instead, music thundered from inside some synthetic bass-heavy song that rattled the window panes. My heart hesitated, then moved forward. Maybe Wesley had come early. Maybe this was a surprise. I walked up the porch steps and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, of course it did. But when I pushed the door, it didn't budge. Something held it from inside. I jiggled the knob, knocked. The music lowered slightly. Then the door cracked open just enough to show her face, Vanessa. Her hair perfectly waved, a glass of white wine in one hand, the other still clutching the chain lock. She blinked once, then smirked. "Why did that old parasite show up?" she said again, louder now. "There's no room for you." I stood there, the air shifting cold despite the sun. Behind her I saw Wesley. His arms were crossed, eyes downcast. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even meet my eyes. The chain clinked softly as she stepped back without unlocking it. I could smell something burning, maybe overcooked garlic bread. Laughter spilled from somewhere in the kitchen, but it wasn't mine. The sofa I bought with Raymond was covered in bright orange throw pillows. The wall where our anniversary photo had hung was bare. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just smiled. A slow, practiced smile, the kind I used to give families when they handed over their dying loved ones to my care, thinking I would crack. I turned and walked back down the steps. By the time I reached the car, the music was loud again, but I had already stopped listening. The next morning, I returned. I didn't knock this time. I waited until someone opened the side door to carry out trash, one of Vanessa's cousins, I think, and slipped in behind them. He gave me a look, unsure if he should say something, but didn't. That told me all I needed to know. The living room was full of bodies. Legs draped over armrests, paper plates piled high on my coffee table. One man I didn't recognize was wearing Wesley's college sweatshirt, barefoot, on the rug I'd brought back from Santa Fe. A teenage girl scrolled on her phone from my recliner, the one Raymond used to fall asleep in after long drives. My eyes landed on the mantel. Gone were the photos of Raymond and me. Gone were the framed drawings Wesley had made in second grade, his stick figures smiling beneath a crooked sun. In their place were glossy portraits of Vanessa's side of the family. Matching outfits, airbrushed teeth. Not one picture of Wesley as a boy. Not one trace of me. I walked into the kitchen. The cabinets had been reorganized. My labeled spice rack was gone. In its place, neatly aligned jars with chalk labels written in Vanessa's tidy, impersonal script. The ceramic canister set my sister had given me was nowhere in sight. The apron I used every summer gone. I opened the refrigerator. Bottles of kombucha, expensive cheeses, a half-drunk bottle of my wine, the label torn. My name was not written on a single item. It was like I had never lived here at all. I made my way toward my old bedroom, but the door was half open, revealing boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Some labeled gym gear, others Christmas lights, none of it mine. The bed was gone. In its place, a folding table and a pile of folded beach towels. Vanessa walked in from the patio, still in sunglasses. "You gave the house to Wesley, right?" she said, like it was a line she had practiced. "So, this is ours now." I looked at her, then at the house. I didn't argue. I just kept walking, my eyes following the path of what used to be mine. This house wasn't just a structure. Raymond and I built it one nail, one paycheck, one slow weekend at a time. He handled the wiring I learned to mix cement. We fought over tile colors over whether the porch swing should face the sun or the street. We were younger than we had any right to be, and we did it anyway. It took us 13 years. When he died, the house became my tether. I didn't have the heart to sell it, not after he'd carved our initials into the back fence. So every summer, I'd drive down from Tucson and open the windows, letting in the salt and memory. Wesley would visit sometimes when Vanessa let him. I made coffee in that old percolator. I read in the corner where Raymond used to nap. I swept every room like he was still there. I never transferred ownership despite Wesley's hints. Instead, I added his name as a partial successor in the trust one that would only take effect upon my death. That was as far as I was willing to go, and even that decision had haunted me lately. But Raymond had been the cautious one. Before he passed, he asked me to keep something private. A legal clause buried in the trust documents. One that made it impossible for any co-successor to sell, rent, or alter the property without full consent of the original title holder, me. And what no one knew, not Wesley, not Vanessa, not even Geneva, was that I'd quietly updated my will 6 months ago. My name still held weight. And that house, that land the investment account linked to it, they were all still mine. Standing in the guest room, staring at the forgotten boxes stacked against the wall, I realized they had written me off too soon. Vanessa thought I was just an old woman with fading memory. Wesley assumed I wouldn't fight back. They thought I had nothing left. But Raymond taught me better. Always leave something tucked away, just in case someone mistakes your silence for surrender. I stepped back into the hallway and began planning what came next. That evening, Vanessa found me in the kitchen, standing by the sink where I used to wash fruit after morning walks with Raymond. She didn't look up from her phone. "We've got a full house for the next couple of days," she said casually. "My parents, my sister's kids, and then Greg and his wife are coming tomorrow." I waited. She glanced up. "You could stay in the garage. It's just temporary, until the rest of my family leaves." My family. I nodded once. No protest, no questions. Just picked up my suitcase from where it sat neatly tucked near the pantry, out of the way like I had tried to be, and walked back to the car. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed me leaving. I drove across town to a small roadside motel, the kind where you leave the light on and keep your purse by the bed. The air smelled like disinfectant and tired carpet, but at least it was mine for the night. I unpacked only the essentials nightgown, toothbrush, the small leather notebook I always kept with me. I'd started writing in it after Raymond passed, just thoughts, little things I wanted to say but didn't. The pen felt heavier that night. I wrote, "They called me a guest, but this is my title, my name, my legacy." I closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand beside my glasses. I thought about the years I'd spent caring for others, first as a wife, then as a nurse, then as a mother. How easily care had turned into expectation, and expectation into dismissal. Vanessa had spoken like she was doing me a favor, letting me stay, letting me breathe in the corners of a home I had built. She didn't know what I still held, what I still remembered, what I had planned long before she ever stepped foot on my porch. I turned off the lamp, but sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling for hours, waiting for the sun and the silence to show me what to do next. I called Geneva the next morning. We hadn't spoken in months, but the moment she heard my voice, she said, "Come over. I'll make coffee." That was Geneva, sharp as a tack, even sharper since retirement. She'd sold half the coastline in her prime and kept every closing document she ever touched. A walking archive of laws, loopholes, and land records. Her home sat on a quiet street, tucked behind oleanders and the scent of overripe citrus. We sat on her porch, the wind lifting the corners of her linen napkins. She poured the coffee without asking how I took it. She still remembered. So she said, leaning back in her chair, "Start from the beginning." I told her everything, Vanessa. The party, the photos, the garage, the way Wesley had looked through me, like I was a window he didn't want to clean. By the time I finished, Geneva was shaking her head and laughing low under her breath. Unbelievable, she muttered, but not surprising. The entitlement of people who've never poured a drop of sweat into anything they own. Then her tone changed. She set her cup down slowly. You didn't sign the place over, did you? I reached into my bag and handed her a folded envelope. The copy of the deed. Geneva unfolded it with care, scanning the fine print. She pointed to one line with a neatly manicured finger. There it is. Still in your name, held in trust. Successor designation, not transfer. She looked up, eyes sharp now. Then you're not powerless. You're just patient. I let the words sink in. You can do whatever you want, she said. They don't get to rewrite the story just because you've been quiet for a while. I sipped my coffee. It was strong, almost bitter. Geneva had always brewed it like that. No cream, no sugar, just truth. They think they've already won, I said. They don't know the game just started, she replied. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 2 words under last night's entry. Noted. Ready. Then I reached for my phone and opened the recorder. I drove back to the house the next day, not to knock, not to enter. Just to listen. I parked 2 houses down and walked along the sidewalk like any other neighbor taking a morning stroll. My knee ached from the motel mattress, but I kept pace, steady, head down. The curtains in the living room were open. They hadn't bothered to close them. I slowed as I neared the porch. Laughter trickled out first, then voices. Familiar, casual, careless. Vanessa was holding court at the dining table with her sister and one of Wesley's old high school friends. Someone poured wine into mismatched stemware. My stemware. I say, once the old lady croaks, we flip this place and put a down payment on that condo near the marina. Vanessa said, waving a hand like she was brushing me off the face of the earth. Her sister laughed. This place has to be close to $1 million now, right? Wesley's voice joined in. Easily. And don't worry, she won't fight. She never does. She just disappears. Vanessa again. She's soft. Always has been. I took my phone from my pocket and started recording. They kept talking. About tearing out the garden, repainting everything, removing the grandma furniture. They joked about how I still used paper checks and didn't know how to use AirDrop. They even joked about the garage, about how kind they'd been to offer it to me. I stood there until I had more than enough. I walked back to the car without looking back. The wind had picked up a bit. Somewhere behind me, a screen door slammed and someone shouted about burgers being ready. Inside the car, I saved the file and labeled it. They said it themselves. Then I called Geneva. Her voice came through clear. Is it time? I answered, without hesitation. Let's begin. She didn't need me to explain. She just said I'll make the calls. Expect paperwork by morning. I ended the call and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write a single word. I just underlined what I'd written the night before. Monday morning came quiet and clear. At 8:02 a.m., the locksmith pulled into the driveway, followed by Geneva's notary and a woman in a charcoal gray suit I'd never met before, Cynthia Price, attorney at law. Efficient, unshakable. Paid in full. We walked up the porch steps together. I knocked once out of habit. Then I stepped back and let the lawyer do the rest. Wesley opened the door, bleary-eyed, barefoot, holding a coffee mug that didn't belong to him. He squinted at the group like we were selling magazines. Is this? He began. Cynthia handed him the envelope. Official notice of revocation of residency and revocation of implied consent to occupy. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Vanessa appeared behind him, already yelling before she reached the door. You can't do this, she snapped. You can't just walk in here and kick us out. We've been living here for months. Geneva stepped forward, holding up the deed and trust agreement like scripture. "You've been squatting," she said calmly. "Your name's not on a single page." Wesley looked at me like he expected me to take his side. "Mom, come on. You're overreacting. We could have talked about this." I met his eyes and said gently, "This isn't overreaction, Wesley. This is legal housekeeping." Vanessa's voice climbed again, but I didn't stay to listen. I turned toward the locksmith who was already working the deadbolt. One by one, every lock was changed, every old key replaced. The mailbox key, the side gate, even the one on the shed behind the house that no one ever used but Raymond. By 10 o'clock, Cynthia had finished filing the paperwork. Geneva handed me the new set of keys, cold and final, in my palm. I stood in the hallway and looked around once at the furniture they'd rearranged, the pictures they'd swapped out, the energy they tried to claim. Then I opened every window wide and let the salt air flood back in. The house exhaled with me. And by noon, the for sale sign was in the ground. The sign was barely in the yard 2 hours before Geneva had 3 calls lined up. She didn't list it publicly, just sent word through her old network, the ones who still trusted her judgment more than any algorithm. Private sale, no fuss, no open house, no staged furniture. By Wednesday afternoon, an offer came in clean, all cash, no contingencies. $985,000. I read the number twice and didn't blink. Geneva asked if I wanted to negotiate. I said no. I wanted it done. Not dragged out, not tangled in pride. Just done. The buyer was a woman from San Francisco, newly divorced, starting fresh. When she walked the house Thursday morning, she didn't comment on the outdated floors or the chipped paint on the railing. She stood in the kitchen, took a breath, and said, "It feels like someone loved this place." I nodded, but didn't say who. We closed on Friday. I signed the final document with a steady hand and left Geneva's office with the keys in a small envelope and my name off the title for the first time in 27 years. I didn't tell Wesley. I didn't need his permission, and I didn't owe him an explanation. On Saturday morning, I composed the text, slowly checking every word before I sent it. The house has been sold. No greeting, no apology, no warning. I didn't wait for a reply. The message was delivered. That was enough. I spent the rest of the afternoon clearing out my own boxes, just the ones I had quietly stashed in the attic, untouched by Vanessa's hands. My percolator, Raymond's fishing cap, a faded photo of the house before it had a front fence. I placed it in the glove box. By nightfall, the porch was empty, the windows shut, and the salt air still. When I backed down the driveway, I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me I needed to reclaim anymore. The road out of Santa Barbara was quieter than I expected. No traffic, no noise, just the rhythmic hum of the tires and the steady beat of my own breathing. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need a soundtrack. I had memory. In the passenger seat sat a small box, everything I'd taken with me. My old coffee mug, stained but solid. A photo of Raymond standing in front of the porch he built with his own hands, wearing that sun-faded hat he never replaced. And my notebook, now heavier with ink than it had ever been. At a rest stop overlooking the ocean, I pulled in and parked beneath a crooked tree. I opened the notebook and flipped through the pages slowly. Words scrawled across long nights, half-lit motel rooms, and silent mornings. Pieces of myself that no one had stolen or overwritten. I found the page I was looking for. The line I'd written weeks ago, right after Geneva first said, "You're not powerless. You're just patient." I read it aloud to no one. They called me old, but I remembered everything and acted while they laughed. The wind picked up for a moment, brushing against the hood of the car like an answer. I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest, just for a second. Back on the road, I drove straight to Geneva's house. She opened the door before I even knocked, holding 2 coffees in mismatched mugs. No words, just a smile and a nod. I sat with her for an hour. We didn't talk much. When I stood to leave, I hugged her tighter than I had in years. On the way home, I made one last stop my lawyer's office in Tucson. When he asked what I needed, I said I want to set up a scholarship fund. For who, he asked. For single mothers going into nursing, I replied. We'll call it the Hartley Fund. He nodded and pulled out a yellow pad. While he wrote, I sat back in the chair, folded my hands, and finally felt the weight begin to lift. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life found me again. The mornings were slower now. I'd rise before the sun heated the desert brew my coffee the old-fashioned way, and sit on the porch with my notebook closed beside me. I didn't write much anymore. I didn't need to. Some chapters are better left without punctuation. My little house in Tucson, the one Raymond and I bought when Wesley was still in grade school, had never felt so full. Not of things, but of clarity, of earned stillness. No more second-guessing. No more tiptoeing through other people's entitlement. A soft knock on the gate made me look up. It was Caleb, the neighbor's boy, holding a plastic container of oatmeal cookies. He wasn't more than 10, all elbows and missing teeth. I waved him in and set my mug down. They're still warm, he said proudly. Mom let me do the cinnamon by myself. I took one and smiled. You did a fine job. He lingered a bit, peeking at the old wind chimes that hadn't been touched in years. I handed him a cookie from the tin and said, Build your own place, sweetheart. And never give away the key to someone who calls you a burden. He didn't know what I meant. He just smiled with crumbs on his chin and ran off across the yard. I leaned back in the chair, watching the breeze carry the last of the summer dust down the street. Inside, my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't need to check the screen. I knew the pattern by now. Wesley called every few days, no voicemail, no message. Just missed calls stacked one after the other, like bricks he couldn't quite build into an apology. I let it ring, then ring again. There was nothing left to say. I had said everything I needed to the house the lawyer, and the silence between me and the door they once tried to lock me out of. And now I had the key to something they never expected me to protect my peace.